Alrighty. Well, Lonnie, it's fantastic to be here and to talk about your books. It's great to finally get this going.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Jack.
I've read both your books. I've loved both of them. I wanted to cast your mind back to 1954. You're a 14-year-old and you hear rock and roll for the first time. Take me through that moment hearing rock and roll for the first time.
Well, I can tell you it was, I guess in a way it was like being shot in the head because it was so very, very different, and it really shattered everything because up to that time, my only music was in a church choir, so that's all very peaceful and whatever, although I was, some of the songs, the hymns and that were really wild, and I was a big soprano, so I'd sing right out there, you know. And then, of course, on radio, it was Johnny Ray and Nat King Cole, and so the music was pretty, conservative. And then rock and roll came along. Well, actually, not rock and roll, rockabilly sort of came along. Just the little groups, you know, the guitar and the bass and sometimes not even drums. And so that came along, and it was very raw, and somehow it just grabbed me, you know, and I just fell in love with it. And of course, I still am. So many years later.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. I mean, because we're talking 71 years ago, rock and roll kind of started entering the scene. I mean, so it still has the same sense of excitement for you?
It does. Yeah, actually it does. And which in a way it amazes me also. You know, so if you're amazed and other people are amazed when I say it, but it also amazes me. But that I've had this passion for so long. But then again, when I stop and think about it. There's guys like, for example, Suzanne, my wife's brother, when he was very tiny, he got into tennis. Now here he's 78 years of age, and every single day he's on the tennis court. He just absolutely loves it. So that passion for him has kept on also. So my passion for music really isn't that different, I suppose, at all, although not too many people I know can last that long, you know, but I still love it. When I go on stage, I'm still a little nervous on stage, strangely enough, until it sort of gets in. But once the music starts, that does it for me again. That's where I want to sit, you know.
In your first book in the series, Almost a Star, you talk about your first public performance when you were a teenager at the 2UW Amateur Hour. What do you remember of that?
Well, That's an amazing story, really, because I sent out to, I was 15, I sent out to two radio stations, 2UE and 2UW, and both of them had an amateur hour. 2UE wrote back and said, sorry, we're booked up for several months, and 2UW said, yes, we'll accept you, come in on this particular date and bring 3 songs, and they'll pick out which song that they wanted me to sing. So I turned up and I wanted to sing Cry because Johnny Ray was my hero. So I wanted to sing the song Cry. And my second song was Nat King Cole's Autumn Leaves, which is a beautiful song. And then for the third song, I thought, well, I'll just try this. I'll bring it along. I won't have to sing it, but I'll bring it along anyway. And that was Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel. And hardly anyone had heard of Elvis at this time. He'd just released Heartbreak Hotel in America a matter of a couple of months before, so it was really, really new, especially in this country. Anyway, I turned up and they said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, Cry. He said, no, you can't do Cry. I said, oh, why not? He said, because someone had just sang it recently and we don't want to repeat the songs. And I said, oh, okay, well, what else can I do? And he said, well, what's the next song? I said, well, I've got Nat King Cole's Autumn Leaves. He said, look, that's a lovely song, I agree with you, but you're not going to be able to do that either because it's too slow. We want something a little bit bright and alive. So he said, what else you got? I said, well, and of course by this time I was really dejected. I wanted to sing Cry, but I knew that Heartbreak Hotel, no one knew it, and I thought, well, that's it, they won't have me. Anyway, I said, okay, it's a song that nobody's ever heard. He said, well, okay, we'll give the music to the piano player, which I did. He started playing, I sang a couple of verses. He said, okay, that'll do. What's it called? I said, Heartbreak Hotel. He said, oh, okay. He said, who sings it? I said, Elvis Presley. He said, who? I said, Elvis Presley. He said, oh, okay. Anyway, about an hour later, when he introduced me on stage to go out and do the song, he said, ladies and gentlemen, here's a young 15-year-old. He's going to sing a song that you've never heard before. and it's by a guy that with a funny name. And that's how they introduced me. That's how they thought of the name Elvis Presley. So anyway, I came second in that, and that started my career. But strangely enough, later on, I learnt that the guy who did Cry before me and why I couldn't do it was Johnny O'Keefe. So he was a Johnny Ray lover, and so he did Cry, and I didn't do it. But anyway, it was a pivotal time in my early career.
I mean, we're talking 1956 there. I mean, 69 years ago. You're still performing today. Do you feel like you've gotten to, like, in terms of performing, you've gotten to know performing like more and more? You've come to understand it more and more as time has gone on?
Well, yes, in a way. I guess it's because it's such a raw thing for me. It was just like any passion that you have. There was no, I didn't have to make believe anything, or I didn't have to imagine anything. It was just there. And as time went on, and as all these years have gone by, it's still the same feeling. It's still, I'm doing it for the same reasons, and it's just all the same. Really, the only thing that's changed is my age. Everything is still the same, you know. Except my age, and boy, has that changed.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the reasons there. I mean, what are the reasons that you still perform today?
Well, other than enjoying the singing part of it, I love to look out there, especially because of the years. I love to look out there and see the people who are grandmas and grandpas and great-grandmas and great-grandpas now. They're all in their 60s, 70s, 80s. And know that those same people were sitting in those seats 60 and 70 years ago when they were 8 and 9 and 10, 12 years of age. And these are the same people. And so I'm the same up here on this side of the microphone. They're the same on that side of the microphone. Their love for music, and their obviously like for me, otherwise they wouldn't be there, is just the same as what it was when they were kids. And that's proven because after the show, when I do a meet and greet, they all come along and they would still want autographs, they would still want photographs with me, and they tell me stories of how they first got to meet me and see me, you know, on bandstand or wherever it was. And so it was, I guess that's because of it. It was lovely to see their smile and know that they're still enjoying what I'm giving them. I can't think of a better reason why not to sing, because it's certainly not for the money.
We were talking about Elvis Presley earlier, and I mean, in 1957, he played a pretty big role in the continuation of your career, or the starting of your career, I should say, because you won a Elvis Presley contest trying to find Elvis Australia. I'll start that again. We're talking about Elvis Presley earlier, and he played a pretty big role in the beginning of your career because you participated in a contest looking for Australia's Elvis Presley. I mean, take me through that. Well,
that was a bit of a fluke, really. It just shows you how destiny really guided me, because it was only about 6 months after the 2UW thing where I sang Heartbreak Hotel, and I was working at 2GB at the time because what I wanted to be was a radio announcer on a country station. And so I had to do that. I had to go to 2GB and learn all the equipment for a radio station and all that sort of stuff. So that's why I was working there. And so I just started learning guitar and singing a few other songs and whatever. And so occasionally I'd take my guitar in there and sing for the staff, my friends. Anyway, one day they said, I took the guitar in there one Monday, and they said to me, Lonnie, there's a big competition on tonight. We've just seen a big competition down at the Trocadero, and do you want to come into it? And I said, no, because I'd never been in front of a big audience before. I said, no, not particularly. And they said, come on, come down. And anyway, they dragged me down there. And we, by the time we got into the backstage, and to put my name down at the Trocadero for the contest. They said, sorry, it's too late, we've got everyone. And I was just about to leave, and they said, no, hang around, because just in case we need somebody, an extra one, we can maybe call on you. So just hang around, you know. So I thought, oh, geez, okay. Anyway, so I hung around for a bit, and right toward the end of the night, they said, quickly, come on, grab your guitar. We need you to go out there. And so I just grabbed the guitar, half put it on, and they pushed me out through the curtain. And here I'm out there looking at all these people, 2,000 of them. I'd never seen so many people in my life. There they were, and all the girls and that, they were all around the stage, at the bottom of the stage, and absolutely everywhere. And so the deal was that I was to sing 3 songs, 3 Elvis songs, and that the audience and the judges would determine who was the best. And there was, I think, maybe about 30 people in the contest. So anyway, I sang the 3 songs that I knew, and the audience went absolutely crazy, just absolutely crazy. And I was just about to come off, and the guy said, no, stay out there, keep singing. They want you to sing more. So I sang and sang and sang, and I sang 8 songs, which is all I knew. That's the whole Elvis catalogue that I knew, 8 songs. So I did it all. Anyway, I finished, and of course I won. So the prize was, I think, 3 guineas, which was like $6 today, and a performance next week that they were starting Australia's or Sydney's first big rock and roll dance. And so that was my first big booking. So that started really everything off for me. And then maybe a month later, I started my little rockabilly band, and that my career went up like that from then.
We're talking 1957 here. Reading your book, Almost a Star, you talk about how during that year you were playing various competitions, various gigs. I mean, what are some of your memories of that year?
Well, I guess other than those 2 things, it was full on, I guess, of excitement, because here I was loving to sing, not so much wanting to be in front of audiences, just wanting to sing. And the only way I could sing, other than in the bathroom or in the lounge room, was to be at places where there was people singing. And the phone didn't stop ringing from agents who gave me jobs. And the jobs were just me with my guitar, no microphone or no electricity or whatever, in the back of tiny little hotels with about 20 people, 10, 15 people in. So I'd be there like one of these Spanish guys, you know, walking around with the guitar singing. So I'd be doing that with my rockabilly songs, and then I'd be going out to, I'd get some calls from some parents who had daughters in the Miss Australia contest. And Miss Australia then was partly due to the girls had to raise money for the Spastic Centre. And so to raise that money, they would run little dances and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And part of that was that they would hire people like me to go there and have the dance. So that started my fans, young people liking me, and that really kicked on. So everything was just a melting pot, and it was just going like there was just really, really full on. And then I got a job with my little rockabilly band playing every single night of the week at the Riverview Hotel in Tempe. And that started. Now, all this time, I'm still working in the bank in the daytime. And then at night time, I'm working every night of the week with my rockabilly band. So it was absolutely full on. And I'm still, 16?
I mean, it sounds like it was an amazing year because, I mean, you know, the phone's ringing, I mean, non-stop to get gigs. But, of course, it kind of, toward December 1957, it kind of comes to an end in that point because you have a car crash, and that's the time, when, as you say in your book, Almost a Star, that the music died for you. I mean, take me through that. Yeah,
that was that's because I was working every night, as I said, in the hotel, and then working every day in the bank. And so I was, 16, 17, so I was really, really getting tired. And it was one Saturday on the way to the bank. Now, for me to go to the hotels and do my jobs, I'd bought a car. It was a 1938 Dodge. So it was a really big, heavy car back in those days. And so I had this. And one day, this Saturday, I was driving to the bank, because banks used to be open Saturday morning. And so I got up to the crest of this hill on the way to the bank, and there were some people from the bank who were waiting for a bus on a bus stop. And as I went by, they screamed out, Laurie, hello, hello. So I heard them, and so I waved to them. And as I got back with my hands back on the wheel, heading down this hill, I put my foot on the brake to try and slow down, and my foot went right to the floor. And so here I am careering down, I'm pumping and nothing's happening. So as I'm going down, instead of going down in a straight line, I'm actually heading over on the other side of the road. Fortunately, no cars were coming up, but I'm heading towards a pole. So somehow destiny, because I didn't think about it, destiny grabbed me, put me in the back seat on top of my guitar, which was in the back seat, and seconds later, the car hit the pole broke in half, and it pushed the motor right through to the back of the seat. I would have been totally squashed, would have been done. Anyway, so my father heard this, he was in the country. He'd heard this and he said, see, I told you rock and roll was no good for you. You're coming back to the country. So I had to give up my band, I had to give up everything and go back to the country, and which I did, and I spent the whole of 1958 back in the country. That was the end of my music, sort of. They talk about when the music died when Buddy Holly had his accident. Well, this was my music dying.
And of course, 1958, you're working as a jackaroo. I mean, during that time, you're cut off from a lot of the new rock and roll records that were coming out. I don't think the radio stations in the local area were playing a lot of the rock and roll at all, but certainly the new rock and roll that was coming out. What was that like, being cut off from your favourite music, like the new records that were coming out?
Well, it was really difficult, and the stations still weren't playing that much of it because it was still very, very new. You know, we're talking here well before the rock and roll really started, and I'd taken up with me up to the sheep property that my family owned. I'd taken my radio, my record player, which was a wind-up player. You know, one of the ones you see where then they got the big horn coming out. So that's I took it up there, and some of the records that I took them up there, and you couldn't buy any records up there at all. So I was pretty isolated from what was going on and what was happening back in Sydney, because I was 600 miles from Sydney, away from it. However, it's strange how things happen, because people heard around the place, they heard that I was a guitar player or a singer, you know, and they liked the music, the teenagers that had never heard rock and roll before, and me singing this stuff, and they just loved it. So of course they were milling around me, and so while I was away from my original career, another one was being born out there, because I was out in the country and everyone was loving what I was doing, and I was offered jobs there with bands to go on tour with bands through the country. So it really didn't stop. It just changed and shifted gear into something else, you know. Really strange, actually. It was. Now I think about it, it's quite an amazing thing.
Well, it's quite a different time. I mean, you're talking about how you had a bunch of records, you had to take it up there with you, you couldn't buy records there. I mean, Such a different era to now, where you have music at your fingertips. I mean, what do you think of things like streaming and having all the music that's pretty much been recorded during all time at your fingertips? I mean, what do you think of that, Lonnie?
Well, I guess, it was my whole life. It became everything. So I really didn't have to think about it. It was just, I was totally involved and encompassed in this whole music thing. The only thing that I had to think about was the work I had to do on the property. You know, I had to kill the sheep. I was on a horse every day out there for 5 or 6 hours in the sheep property with the shearing and putting fences up and doing that. I had to think about all that stuff. But while I'm doing all that stuff for the property, I was still engrossed in this in my music scene. So it was alive in me, although I couldn't hear it on radio, and I didn't have a band, and I was away from it. I was still in this bubble of the music that I loved, because that was my passion. That was it.
Late 1958, you decided to move back to Sydney to pursue music. What was it like having to almost re-establish yourself in the music scene over there?
That was really difficult, because I'd spent the whole year in the sheep property. And although I was still doing things, as I said, I was still, doing my rockabilly stuff and whatever. When I went back to Sydney, although a year doesn't sound long, it was long for me then. I came back then and I felt very alienated. Everyone I knew, my band that I'd had before, they'd all gone, split up and gone different places. So, and I was never one to have a lot of friends. I was quite a lonely sort of a loner guy, you know. So I had to really start again. So it was very difficult because I was starting right at the very, very bottom again. And that was another story. That was that sort of all in my second book, all that business of which was the beginning of 1959, which 1959 was I guess the main start of rock and roll, not just here but all around the world. That was it. But up to then, it was like a rehearsal time for me, you know. And then when I came back from the country and I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'm not up there anymore. I'm down back here again, but there's no band, I'm starting again, everything's new. I don't know it, so I had to go out and restart everything. It was difficult.
In terms of the music scene itself, I mean, talking 1957 and then now 1958, I mean, had it changed a lot in that year, like the music scene itself?
Yes, it had, because a lot of new artists came up. You know, there were when I left to go to the country at the end of '57. Then there was Buddy Holly and Elvis and Chuck Berry and Carl Perkins, Gene Vincent, all the great rockabilly guys, and they were the ones that I loved. And then in 1958, while I was in the country, although I didn't know it, but they were coming out. There was people like Bobby Rydell and James Darren and all these Bobby Darin and all these other artists who weren't rockabilly. But they were sort of bringing in rock and roll with a big band and all that. So a change from rockabilly into actual rock and roll. So by the time 1959 started and I'm back in Sydney and I'm starting again, it was a whole new ball game. Not just for me feeling that I'm back in somewhere that I'd left. It was just that all the music was changed around me. So I had to learn a lot of these new songs, which, by the way, I loved anyway. So it's not as if I was learning songs that I didn't like. No, I liked pretty much everything in rock and roll or rockabilly, you know.
And I think it's an interesting point too. I mean, having to learn those new songs, as you were saying. I mean, back in 1957, 58, I mean, what was your process in trying to learn the songs? You know, you can't look it up online because there's no internet at that stage. You can't look up the chords. I mean, how did you go about that back then?
Well, that was, I guess, you listen to the record and somehow, because you're young, the words go in there and somehow they stick in there, you know. And sometimes if I had to write them down and whatever, and not too many times that I remember writing them down and having to learn them, like schoolwork. They just got in there. I loved them so much that I embraced the words that were in there, you know. And so it was easy. Now it's difficult to try and remember those things. I've got to really concentrate now. But back then, they just went in my brain and they stuck there.
And in terms of what radio was playing back then, 57, 58, I mean, were they playing a lot of a mixture of stuff? Like, were they playing a Bing Crosby record and then an Elvis record? I mean, is that kind of how it was at that point?
Yes, that's pretty much what it was. Yeah, rock and roll. They used to have what they call a hit parade, and that was the top 10, and that was once a week. It's on a Thursday. So once a week there'd be a top 10, and then eventually it got to top 20, and it was maybe 2 times a week, and so it'd go on more and more like that. And it wasn't on sales. It was just on what the radio station thought was most popular, until eventually they'd go out to the record stores and say, oh, what's selling a lot, and then that way sales came into it, and the hit parades came into being what you sold, not only what people liked. And
I think it's an interesting era too, because radio really was the main way of discovering songs that had just come out, new music. I mean, you know, that's a very different time to today, where people are discovering music on Spotify, online, wherever they may discover it. I mean, just to highlight, I mean, what was the importance of radio to music at that time?
Well, it really wasn't important at all, except that you hung on to the times when you knew that there was a program on that they were going to be playing some of these things, because they weren't playing them all the time. It was just a particular program, you know, maybe a 15-minute program or a half-an-hour program on a Thursday, Wednesday or whatever. And so you'd hang on to that. But radio, other than that, wasn't important at all. But when I got my little rockabilly band, it was important because that's when I would go there and my fans would be there and I'd be singing and all that sort of stuff. So that happened later.
And I mean, after talking about your second book, Starlight, Star Bright, it begins when you get back to Sydney in 1958. I mean, building that career, I mean, what was that process in building your career again? Was that a fast process or did it take time?
Oh no, it took a long time. That was the beginning of '59, and it wasn't until the end of '59 that I recorded and really started everything. So it virtually took the whole year for me to get things going again, and it was a lot of it was destiny that just happened. It just drove me here and took me there and whatever, and I did this because I felt like that, and it wasn't that anyone came up and said, "Oh, come here, kid, I'll make you a star," which happened to a lot of people in America, but didn't in this country. So it just but it did take a long time trying to work this out and and I had different bands and went through this, and it was now I think about it, it was a pretty messy time.
An important moment in your career. I mean, we're talking about you're coming back to Sydney, and September 1959. You're not even 19 years old, and you meet Johnny O'Keefe in his flat in Dover Heights, and he asks you to appear on 6 O'Clock Rock. I mean, that's a pretty important moment in your career. I mean, take me through that.
Yes, that was something because from the different dances and stuff that I've been doing, I developed a little fan club, and those girls, 6 O'Clock Rock, the program had just started, and those girls contacted Johnny O'Keefe, and they said that they know this guy. Do you want to have a listen to him? And so they arranged that for me. So I turned up at John's place, at his house, and sang a couple of songs for him. He said, "Oh yeah, okay, we'll put you on next week." And so that really that just started like that. Then I reminded him that he was the compere on the Trocadero when I won the Elvis thing. Plus, as well, he was the one that sang "Cry" when I couldn't sing "Cry." So that started a lifelong friendship. So my stuff went back to me actually meeting him face to face.
And I think it's directly after that meeting. I think you're walking out and you're under a lamppost, and he says to you, "Oh, you look a lot like Lonnie Donegan," and that's how you get your name, Lonnie Lee. Take me through that.
Yeah, that was really weird. I was just leaving, and the car was parked out near his apartment, and there was the lamppost, and the light came on, and I was just about to get in the car, and he said, "Oh, hang on, Laurie," because I was Laurie, Lawrence and Laurie was short for that. So he said, "Hang on, Laurie, geez, has anyone told you look like Lonnie Donegan?" I said, "No, of course they haven't." No, he said, "You do? Have you thought about changing your name to Lonnie?" I said, "No, of course I haven't." Anyway, while I'm driving home, I'm thinking, Lonnie, yeah, okay, maybe. And then so I thought, okay, why not? I said to my mother, what do you think? And she said, yeah, sounds good. So that's how I just changed it to Lonnie. So I went from Laurie to Lonnie.
And I mean, JOK, I mean, we owe so much to him and the development of Australian music. I mean, how would you describe JOK as a person?
He was a nice guy. He was. I liked him. We got on very, very well all his life that I knew him, and he was a very respectful guy. He was quite a conservative guy. He wasn't, I guess, really out there and brash as he appeared to be. But that was the persona that he put on for his image. He was a very quiet sort of a guy, and a lot of people criticize him, saying he was this and that and whatever. But I didn't. I only found him to be a really nice guy. He had so much incredible energy to drive himself for his career, the same as Elvis did. Elvis wasn't just sitting under a tree. He was out there doing things to make his career work. And so, and Johnny O'Keefe was exactly the same. He'd push doors down and do everything, whereas I wasn't. I was very shy and quiet. And so John would be out there knocking the doors down and doing all that, and I'd be walking in behind him in the vacuum and taking advantage of that.
Well, we're talking about your Johnny O'Keefe got you on 6 o'clock rock, and that's how you came to the attention of promoter Lee Gordon, and you met him at his office in Rushcutters Bay, and then that's how you get to make your first record. I mean, take me through that.
Well, it was a long story, really, because when he invited me on to do 6 o'clock rock, I went on there first as Laurie, because with the Lonnie bit. So I went on there as Laurie. Then the next week I went on as Lonnie, and I was on for pretty much. If I wasn't on every week, I was on every second week or third week at the longest. And so it gave me very quickly. It gave me a lot of popularity, and so Lee Gordon, who's the guy that brings all the artists out to Australia, the Johnny Cashes and the Bill Haleys and all these people, they contacted me, the office contacted me and said, would you like to make a record? And of course, it's my dream, So, and I'd had a band, by then I'd had another band. And so I said, okay. So he said, okay, get 4 songs and we'll make this record. So I did. I recorded the record was what we call an EP, extended play, so there's 4 songs on it, but it was still a 45, so it's still quite small. Anyway, it was called This Is Lonne Lee. So I did That's All Right Mama, which is, of course, that was Elvis's first song, but my version is really, really different to Elvis, very, very different. Still, it was the same song. Then I did Love a Doll, which I did at my dances, and all the kids loved Love a Doll. They wanted me to do, when I told them I was going to record, they said, oh, you've got to record Love a Doll, so I did that. And then the other 2 songs were written by my piano player at the time. He was blind, a blind piano player, and he'd written these 2 beautiful songs. One was called Rosaline, and the other one was called My First Day. So that was the EP, and it did so well in sales. It was never played on radio because I didn't play albums. But it did so well in sales that a matter of a month later, he called me up again and he said, would you like to do a single? And I said, oh, yes, absolutely, fantastic, because knowing that a single would get play on radio, or hopefully it would. Anyway, he said, okay, we'll get a song, choose your song that you want to sing, go and rehearse it, and we'll record it. So I got a song, and the song that I got was a thing called, it was written by the guy that recorded Do You Want to Dance, Bobby Freeman. And it was a song called Shame on You, Miss Johnson. And it was a real wild song. And they loved it at my dances. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. So anyway, I turned up and we released it, or didn't release it, we rehearsed it. And at the rehearsal, just as I'd finished, Johnny O'Keefe came walking into the studio. And this was a bit strange because Johnny O'Keefe had nothing to do with my career then as such, except that he gave me the 6 o'clock rock deal. Anyway, but at this time, that same week, Lee Gordon had given him the job of looking after all the artists on the lead-on label because Lee and his office were so busy in promoting shows, they didn't have any time for the record label anymore. So they gave John this job, and that's the job that he wanted. Anyway, he came in and he said, what's the song like? I said, we rehearsed it, it sounds good. So he said, can I have a listen to it? So we played it, and he said, oh, wow. He said, that's tremendous. I'm sure that's going to do really, really good for you. It's really wild and whatever. So he said, what's the next song? And this is ridiculous. I'm embarrassed every time I say it because Lee Gordon had told me get one song, just get a song together. And that's what I did. I got one song. I didn't even think that you had to have 2 songs for a record, side A, side B. So I just turned up with one. Anyway, Jock said, do you have another song? I said, no, I don't. He said, well, have you written anything, or is there anything that you'd like to record? And I couldn't think of anything, but I said, look, can we maybe see if we can write something? So we got on, there was a piano there, so we sent the band out to have lunch, and he and I jumped on the piano, him on one end and me on the other end, and we messed around a bit. And in 20 minutes, we'd written this song. Anyway, we rehearsed it and whatever. And then when it was released, maybe 5-6 weeks later, it was released, and we took it to the radio station, to SM at the time, and they played the side A, Shame on You, Miss Johnson. They said, oh yeah, this is really, really good. And as he took the record off, he flipped it over and he saw this other song that had Australian composition, which was really, really, really rare in those times. The Australians didn't write songs then. So he said, no, this is an Aussie comp. And I said, yeah, this is Jock and I wrote it, you know. He said, okay, I'll have a listen. So we listened to it. He said, oh, quite, this is much better than the other one. I'm going to play this one. And the song was called Ain't It So. And strangely enough, in Melbourne, the guy who was the main guy down there, Stan Rofe, he did the same thing. He liked Ain't It So in preference to Shame on You. And so they played that, and that became my first big #1 song. And that started the whole thing rolling. Everything just went right up a notch then. So now I was doing TV every week, and then now I'm recording, and I've got a #1 record, and so that's all happening. So it was all going then.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting. I mean, I was reading your book Starlight Star Bright, and you were talking about Ain't It So, and how I think the Deltones did backing on that, and that got me thinking, because I read recently that Ian Pee Wee Wilson recently retired from singing, and that got me thinking that it might be the case that you might be the last 1950s Aussie rock and rollers still performing today. I mean, when you hear something like that, like what does that mean to you?
Being the last man, yeah. Well, it's strange in a way, because there are a couple of the guys still doing a little bit around the place. They're not doing much, but they're doing a little bit. I'm the only one that's sort of really full on doing what I'm doing, and still writing songs and still releasing stuff and whatever, and doing theatres by myself and whatever. The other guys are just sort of doing a little bit, but at the same time it's really strange, because the only two that were pretty much on my level, or I was on their level, was Johnny O'Keefe and Cole Joy. We were the major hit makers at the time. And of course we lost John in the 70s. Cole, unfortunately, we just lost a matter of a couple of months ago. So I am really the last man standing. And it reminds me of Jerry Lee Lewis had the same sort of thing. They called him the last man standing because he was the last man standing from Elvis and those guys there as well. And in a way, it's while it's a catchy title, I do stop and think sometimes I wish that they were around so I could get on the phone and we could talk about those days, because there's no one for me to talk about those days anymore. No one was around in those days. So that makes it a bit lonely, you know.
You mentioned Johnny O'Keefe there, and I think it was 1978 when he passed. I mean, do you remember where you were when you heard that he had unfortunately passed away?
Yes, I was still in America. I'd been in America, been living in America for all these years, and I'd heard about it there. My sister wrote to me and told me, and then I tried to contact his mother, and I couldn't get through, because in those times it wasn't that easy communicating from one country to another, nothing like today. And so, but it happened about a month later, maybe 6 weeks later, I was to come out back to Australia with a show called Elvis: The Last Farewell, which featured an American Elvis from Las Vegas and a couple of other artists from Las Vegas, and I was the Australian part in that show. So we were to do a tour of Australia, and that was the last. That was the time that I arrived back here. So when I came back here, I was able to call his mum and speak with his mum and all that, and it was devastating. It was terrible to think, because I'd got a letter from him, I guess maybe 6 months before. We'd write to each other every now and then while I was overseas, and he told me at one stage that he was trying to put a frame up, a photo frame or a picture up on a wall, and he stood on a glass table, and he went through the glass table and cut all his leg and all that sort of stuff. I don't know whether that got out into publicity or not, but he told me about that, and that wasn't too long before he passed. But it was very, very sad.
We were mentioning how Ain't It So became your first hit single, and in Starlight Star Bright, your book, you go through, you mentioned some pretty interesting interactions with fans, and how, I mean, you mentioned how some would break into your motel room. I mean, what are some of your favourite interactions with fans during your height of fame?
Well, there was a lot of things, because it was so new, because this was the first time fans, not just in Sydney, but especially out in the country, that had seen anyone that they'd heard on radio or seen on TV. So they'd never seen celebrities before. So whenever we walked, even in the city of Sydney, which at that time still had like 2.5 million people, even when we walked down the main street of Sydney, as soon as someone spotted me, they'd be, oh, there's Lonnie Lee. And so the people would come out of stores and they'd be hanging out of the windows up in there. The word would get around, and so you'd have to, sometimes they'd chase you. So you'd have to run to hide to get away, or they'd be there wanting you to sign autographs and all that. There wasn't anyone taking photographs because no one had cameras in those days, too much. And so that was one of the interactions. Another one was if we went out to, there was no fast food joints, but if we went out to a restaurant to have dinner in a restaurant, everyone would be around. They'd be, oh, look, there's Lonnie Lee over there. And so you'd be embarrassed because you're trying to put some food in your mouth and everyone's gaping at you and looking at you, and so that was really sort of embarrassing. I remember one time I was out with Brian Henderson because we were great mates, and he felt the same, and both of us felt, oh, really yuck, because they were all around, everyone was all around there, and they'd stopped eating and just watching us eat. So that was strange. And then at other times, if we're out with our cars and we'd drive into a town, the fans would come out and they'd write all over their telephone numbers and their names, and we love you, Lonnie, and draw hearts and kisses and whatever all over our cars with lipstick. So our cars would be totally covered with these lipstick messages. And on the other side of it, there was the guys who were jealous of us, would get pennies and drag them along the side of the car and cut right into the enamel and ruin the paintwork, or they'd get the windscreen wipers and pull the windscreen wipers off, stab the tyres, let the air out of the tyres. One time they broke my headlights and tail lights and side windows. So not all the stuff was beautiful. There was a lot of stuff that was really bad. But that was all interaction with the audience, other than doing the show, and there they were screaming their faces off.
Starlight Star Bright followed and it's so as a hit, and I read in your book Starlight Star Bright that you found the song where you're going through, I think, a heap of demoed material from artists on the Leeds music roster. I mean, take me through that process in finding that song.
Well, the idea was back in those days that you'd go to the publishers, because you didn't write, there were hardly any Australian songs at the time. Us writing Ain't It So was just because I didn't have another song. So there wasn't, we wrote that, let's sit down and write a whole bunch. No, we didn't think like that. We didn't have that mentality here. Whereas in America, yes, they could see that writing songs was very lucrative. They'd made lots and lots of money. Whereas out here, there wasn't any money to be made writing songs, really. So we got our songs from publishers. Now, the publishers were very small, usually. But you'd go there, and if they knew that you wanted songs, they would get in from America a whole bunch of records that people had recorded overseas or songwriters had written, and they weren't on tape. There was no cassettes or anything back in those days, so they were all on records. Now, they weren't always the record that you buy. They were what we call acetates. So in the studio, you'd sing the song, and they would grind it into this soft wax. And you could only play it maybe 10, 15 times, and then it wouldn't work anymore. So that's what we'd listen to, those songs from songwriters. And sometimes I'd go to the publishers and they sit there for 4 hours, and they'd have stacks and stacks and stacks of all these songs. And I'd choose what songs I'd like to record, and that's how that happened. And of course, that happened with Starlight Star Bright, the same thing. I heard this guy pumping away on a piano, and I liked the idea of it. I liked the title, Starlight Star Bright. It was a nice, bright title, and the feel of it was good. So I thought, yes, okay, I'll do that. And then when I recorded it, I had the guitar doing an upbeat, chut, 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 and so that became like the image for my image in those days. So that's why Starlight Star Bright, you hear the guitar, the really high-pitched guitar. And then later on, I found New Love. I did the same thing. Yes, indeed, I do. I did the same thing. So I used that same formula there for that. Plus as well, we had the big choir, not just the Deltones, but we got the singers in from Channel 7. They were the Channel 7 choir. So sometimes I'd have maybe 8 or 9 singers in there. So in Starlight Starbright we'd have all these big singers as well. So it was very new for Australia at the time.
And of course, Starlight Starbright goes on to be your signature song. I mean, at that time in 1960, did you have any idea that 60 years later you'd still be singing the song?
Oh, God, no. No, I had no idea I'd be alive in 60 years, let alone singing the same song. No, I never thought of that at all. It was like a day-to-day. It was in the moment life, really. There wasn't that much thinking far ahead. Oh, in 10 years I'll do this, and in 5 years I'll do that. Maybe some people thought like that. I don't know. I didn't. Mine was just. It was just like what's happening tomorrow, the next day. That's it. It just went on like that, and that's how my life has gone on. And even today, still, as I said, I still sing that song. I've sung that every show I've done around the world. I've sung that song, and I found it, did I guess, and did I do, and ain't it so? And those same songs, I'm still singing them. And if I did a show in Australia without singing those songs, they'd be very disappointed. When I'd come off stage, they'd say, "Why didn't you sing that?" I mean, they still say, "Why didn't you sing something?" Because I can't sing all my songs. You know, I've recorded nearly 600 songs altogether, and of those there's maybe 15 that were really big hits, and so I can't sing them all. So I'll come off stage even now after singing "Yes Indeed I Do," "Starlight Starbright," "I Found a New Love," "Ain't It So," "When the Bells Stop Ringing," and they'll say, "Oh, why didn't you sing "Sit Around and Talk"? Or why didn't you sing "Sitting by the River"? Or why didn't you sing something else? I can't sing everything, you know. So, but "Starlight Starbright," yeah, if I didn't do that, well, I wouldn't like to be me.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, if you've played that song pretty much every concert since it was released, I mean, you must have performed that song thousands of times.
Thousands of times.
It's still exciting to play those songs, even though you've played them so many times.
Yeah, it is. It still is. Yeah, I still sing it in the same key that I did when I was 19. So everything about it is the same. The only thing is that if the band is different, and so the backing is different, and I don't have the big choir and all that behind me. But as far as singing the song, it's still the same to me. I still have the same. I still put the same energies into it. I naturally sound a little different because I'm matured all these years, but singing it in the same key, it sounds much the same. My phrasing is still much the same, maybe a little bit different to the record, but it's pretty much the same. And I still get the same buzz out of it, as I indeed do to all my songs. I'm very proud of all my songs. I know most of the acts that I know. I've said to them, "Why didn't you sing your song in your show?" "Oh, I hate the song. I don't like it. No, I don't want to do it. I didn't want to record it, and I don't like it." And whereas in my case, I loved my songs then, and I still love the songs. And none of them are really, they really haven't aged. You know, it's not as if you hear some songs and you go, "Oh, that's definitely a really old song." Somehow my songs just haven't aged.
One of the most interesting things I read in the book was, with the success of Starlight Starbright, you decided to call up Norman Petty in Clovis, New Mexico, and I mean, Norman Petty being Buddy Holly's former manager and producer. I mean, tell me about that, yeah.
Well, that came about because a guy at the time, when I was with Lee Gordon, a guy at the time that was with Lee at the time, George Hilder, he was instrumental in allowing Lee to bring Frankie Lane out to Australia, because he was the president of the Frankie Lane fan club in Australia. And Frankie Lane at the time, this is in 1955, I think, Frankie Lane didn't want to come spend a long time on a plane to come into Australia, because in those days they had to stop off at Hawaii, then they had to stop off at Fiji to get to Australia. It was a long haul, you know. So, and Frankie didn't want to do it. So Lee sent this guy, George Hilder, over to America to try and talk Frankie to come into Australia, and he succeeded. And so he became, when he was out here, he became a producer and a promoter of shows. And he and I got on very, very well. Lovely old gentleman, much older than I. And we got on very, very well. And during when Buddy Holly came out to Australia, I was in the country at the time, so I couldn't see him or anything. I was in the country. But George became friends with Norman Petty, and became really, really good friends with him. And he said to me, listen, I know Norman's really, really tough. He doesn't take lots of artists. He says no to so many people. But he said, no, I know he'd love your stuff. He said, I'll mention it to him, and then why don't you write to him and see what happens. So I wrote to Norman, who wrote back to me a lovely letter, and it started a long friendship with Norman. And in the end, I called him. So I used to have phone calls to him, maybe every couple of months. I'd talk to Norman, and he wanted to release Starlight Starbright and a couple of other of my songs, but Festival Records put a high price on the percentages that they wanted from him, and he said, I can't afford to pay those percentages because I've got to on-sell the productions to the record company in America, and there's not that much money. And but it'd be great if we could do it because it'd start your career. But Festival Records, in their bastardry, said no, we want the money, and so that was the end. That sort of ruined my American career. And Norman couldn't believe their ignorance.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories like that from Festival. I mean, do you think? Well, how do you think Festival Records could have better helped Australian artists to make it overseas? Do you think?
Well, by doing that, by accepting someone who had a very big track record. I mean, God, he'd co-written with Buddy half of his songs, half of his big hits. He'd recorded virtually everything that he did, except for his very latest stuff. And plus as many other hits he'd recorded. Roy Orbison first, Waylon Jennings, God, so many artists he'd recorded. He had the Fireballs and Jimmy Gilmer, and this coming out the Yin Yang. And so he was one of the top producers at the time. And so for Festival Records to say no to a guy who would give an Australian guy a really good chance in America is just absolutely absurd. I think back now, and I can hardly say it's absolute bloody bastardry that they did that. And I heard that they did that same sort of thing for other artists as well. They were just stupid, ignorant people. And that's why I left Festival, because they were stupid. But it turned out they went to HMV years later, and they were just as stupid. So Australia, we had until Mushroom, that guy with Mushroom, Gadinsky, he was a switched-on sort of a guy, and he took a lot of what they were doing in America and England and applied it out here. Whereas the other guys, they were stupid. They didn't. And so until then, we suffered, which is a great shame.
In the same year, in 1960, you got to tour with Jerry Lewis on one of Lee Gordon's Parade of Stars super shows, and you had a really interesting moment with him. I think it was after a show in Hobart. You were back at I think it was Haley's Hotel, and you're in the lobby at this grand piano, and Jerry Lewis, this rock and roll pioneer, is singing your songs back to you. I mean, take me through that.
Yeah, that would. What had happened after we do a show? This is with all the big American acts, the Everlys and all the other acts that we perform with. After we do a show, we usually go back to the motel, and there wasn't a motel or hotels, and they'd usually put on a big dinner for us, a big spread for us, and introduce us to the mayor and all the different people of the city or the town. And that happened in Hobart. We went back to their beautiful old hotel called Hadley's, which is still there. Glorious old hotel. Anyway, we went back there and we had to have the dinner. They had it all set up in the lobby. Actually, closed the place down, and so we all had. They introduced us to everybody, and then there was a piano in the lobby. There, big lovely old grand piano. Anyway, as soon as Jerry Lee Lewis saw it, he said, "Oh, okay." So he sat down on it and started playing his songs, his boogie stuff on the piano, and everyone was singing. We were all doing all that, and then as the time went on, we were thinking, "Oh, geez, we've got to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, or the flight leaves at 7 o'clock in the morning," and it's already like 1 o'clock. So everyone went off to the beds, and it ended up just Jerry and me there. And then so he would be on the long seat on the piano. He'd be sitting over here playing his stuff, and I'd be sitting on here with my guitar. So he'd be singing my songs, Starlight Starbright, and all these my songs, and I'd be singing his songs, and it was great fun, absolutely wonderful. I'd give anything to have it on, to have it videoed on tape or even audio, because it was just absolutely a wonderful moment that I cherish right now. So that was what now happened at that time. But similar things happened as we went through at different shows. We'd get off and because we were all friends. Everyone was really friendly back in those days. Back there, whilst there was a little bit of competition, it really wasn't that much at all.
In 1960, also you had another. Well, I'd probably call it an historic achievement, because you had the first album cover that was a full colour, that was fully in colour, and I mean, take me through how that kind of came about.
Well, in those days, because it was everything was so limited here. We didn't sell millions because there weren't millions of people here. There was I think 5 million people in Australia at the time, or 10 million, maybe maximum. And so it was we wouldn't sell lots of people, so the record companies couldn't put that much money into things. So what they'd do is the covers they printed with 2 colours. So you'd have white, which was the normal colour of the cardboard, and then you'd have maybe red or black or green and black. So you'd really have the 3, the white and then 2 other colours. And so all the albums were those sorts of things until the middle of 1960. I just recorded my first album, and we were going off on tour up to Queensland. It's in May '60, up to Queensland to take the first big rock and roll show up through New South Wales up to Cairns with Johnny O'Keefe. And so I went to buy a new car, and I wanted to buy a Zephyr. So I went to the Ford dealership in Broadway in Sydney, and I said I'd like to buy the car, and I wanted a red one. And you couldn't get red in those days, so they had to bake it especially for me and all that. But while I was there, they had a car in the showroom, a really modern car. Boy, it looked really, really space age at the time. I said, what's this thing? This is the new car that's going to be coming out very soon. I said, oh wow, that's tremendous. And he said, would you like to have a photograph taken with it? So I said, okay, that'll be great. And I said, listen, I've got an idea. What about if I have a photograph taken with it, because I knew it was really popular. If I had a photograph taken with the thing and we put it on an album, would you pay for the colour, for the full colour of the album? Because it would have to be a full colour, which was extremely expensive at the time. Anyway, they had a meeting and all that, and they came back and said, yes, okay, that's it. So we got one of Australia's top models at the time, a guy called Diane Parkinson, and she came on, and we had the photograph taken, and that became on my first album, A Night Out with Lonne Lee, and that was, of course, the first Falcon that ever happened.
Moving it forward a few years now, 1964, the Beatles touched down on Australian shores. What was that like? The music was changing, the British invasion was happening. What was that like for the artists in Australia that had kind of came just before that British invasion?
It was pretty devastating, really, because it wasn't so much the fans that stopped liking us. They didn't. Our fans stayed with us. Well, God, they still stayed with me now, 60 years later. So they stayed with us. But what happened, and it was a really big thing, and not just here, it was in America and England as well, radio started playing this new stuff. So they could only play a certain amount of records a day. So to play this new stuff, they had to stop playing the old stuff, which was our stuff. So we got less and less play on radio. And the new, what we call the English invasion here, the Beatles and the Searchers and Jerry and the Pacemakers and all those sorts of groups, the English stuff, they were getting all the play. Now, because we weren't getting play on radio, less and less people heard us, and that makes a difference when you're drawing people into theatres and into dances. If they don't hear from you, they not so much think that you're gone, but it doesn't instigate them to, oh, let's go and see him or her, So because they didn't hear us a lot on radio, less and less of them came to our shows and to our dances. And so things went down and down, and to make it even worse, a credit squeeze. Our audiences went down, money became tight, and so many of those artists at that time had to give up show business, and they gave up for the rest of their lives. Was O'Keefe, Joy, myself, actually stayed in the industry, and we kept on going. But it was hard, but not just for us, but it happened in America as well. And the only one that got through that was Elvis because of his movies.
We've got about 7.5 minutes left, Lonnie, but I wanted to mention the books. I mean, I think it's 1965 when you started to think about writing a book. I mean, take me through that the first kind of moment you're thinking about writing something to now having it published. Yeah.
Okay, well, I started writing the book in 1965, and I took it to a publisher, and they said, "Oh, yeah, wow, this is very interesting, but you mention all these people that you think have done bad to you. You're going to have to mention names. We're going to have to dig a bit dirt because no one's going to be interested in the book without the names." And I said, "I can't do that. These people are still the top DJs and the top producers in Australia. If I mention their names in this book, that's the end of my career." They said, "Okay, well, think about it and then maybe do it." So, of course, the book didn't come out. But years later, like 50 years later, 60 years later, whatever it is, I didn't have to worry about anybody mentioning anybody's names then because they were either dead or near dead. And so I was able to write the books and not worry about who I mentioned and who I didn't. And so that's what the first two books are. Just they're the truth of how I remembered it, everything.
And of course, you've got almost Amongst the Stars coming out next. I mean, tell me about the books that are coming up.
Yes, the next book is about all my years in America. And so I spent a lot of years in America, so that'll be the next book called Amongst the Stars, and that's up till 1984, and then that's when I came back to Australia. And then the fourth book is about all my life in Australia up till COVID. So that covers the whole books. My early life, my major success, my American life, and then my life since then.
I mean, I'm sure you're very busy, but what's next for you after the books? And I mean, is it just more gigs? Like, do you have any other projects in the works? Like, what's happening?
No, I guess cleaning everything up for the museums and those things. Really, that's what it's going to be. And I'm still working. I'm still performing all over the place. I still want to write. I've still got a lot of songs that I've half written. I'd love to write again, but time is the thing. I know I've got a limited time ahead, but I'm full on doing what I love to do, and I'm going to keep going until I fall off the perch.
I want to thank you for your time today, Lonnie. I've really enjoyed being able to delve into your career and talk about your books.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jack. It's been tremendous with you. Thank you so much.